The talking, nagging, lucha watching, puro viewing, indie supporting, drinking, cursing, son of a gun of a podcast. Join former pro wrestler and promoter Dave Dynasty and co-host Ike Isaacs as they talk wrestling and interview those within the business, bringing positivity back to pro wrestling. This is the Dave Dynasty Show.
Greetings and welcome to the Dave Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Dave Dynasty. Thank you for joining us for this new episode, kind of a special episode, a unique episode for us. As we dive into this, let me first make sure that you follow us on social media. Just look up Dave Dynasty or Dave Dynasty Show. We're on all those, but particularly hit us up on Twitter. Mine is at the Dave Dynasty. And I am being joined by my co-host, Ike Isaac. Ike, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing, Dave?
I'm okay. So here we go. So what we're going to do today, I put this out on social media, a couple weeks ago, I think. I'm not sure how long ago it was, but asked for people to send me what-if scenarios. And what that is there's significant points in professional wrestling history, and I wanted people to come up with scenarios of what if this had or hadn't happened, what if things had been different at these points, and what would that have meant for the lineage of professional wrestling. And we got an overwhelming response. We have this huge list of responses, and we're probably going to have to do a second part, maybe a third part in the future down the road somewhere. But today we've pulled out, I think, 15 of these, and that we're going to talk a little bit about. And Ike's he's going to kind of drive this thing. He's got the list, and he's going to put these out there for me, and I'm going to give some of my opinions, and we're going to go from there and see what happens. So Ike, why don't you go ahead and let's start this list and let's discuss these.
Absolutely. All right. So it looks like the first one we got here for us is this is a good one. What if Owen Hart had refused to do the Blue Blazer descent?
Well, let's see. Obviously, I think the first point is Owen would probably still be alive. I think that would be the first thing. And I don't know. As far as I don't know. It could have. It could change a lot of things. I mean, Owen was set, I think, to have a big push in WWE in the future. He was, helping to replace Bret as that Canadian, standout star. But I don't know. You always hear these tales of Owen, had this plan to only wrestle to a certain point and retire. He wanted to be a fireman. So I don't know if he had not done this, if he had not passed away, how much longer he would have been in the business. But it's wild to think of some of the guys that, if Owen had lived, that he could have had matches with that were coming in shortly after. The Chris Benoits, the Eddie Guerreros, the Dean Malenkos, and some of these kind of guys, Edge, that Owen could have caught at that point of his career and had matches with. And that's not to say that even though that there wouldn't ultimately be the point that Owen would have wound up ultimately in WCW with Bret, or that this might have not been a catalyst to bring Bret back to the WWE. Who knows? I mean, there are lots of things that could have happened with this, but I think the most ultimate thing of it is that Owen would still be alive, and a wife would still have her husband, and two kids would still have their father. So, but Owen was, he didn't like it. All the word was he didn't enjoy this. He didn't like it. He thought it was ridiculous. He thought it was a little scared, but he was a company guy, and he'd already refused an earlier angle to have this quote unquote affair with Deborah McMichael on air, and he didn't want that, so he kind of felt like he couldn't not do this one, and that's what so he went along with it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on what would have happened. So what's next?
Looks like the next one is, what if Shawn Michaels was the NWO third man? I'm assuming this is in lieu of Hulk Hogan, right?
Yeah. Well, there was always this, I don't know how much there was to it. There was always this talk that Shawn would make the jump to WCW. I mean, he was obviously, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and him were very close friends. There was always all these times when Shawn was, he was upset about this or upset about that and didn't want to work and didn't want to drop titles. So there was always this talk that at some point he would, be offered or would get this big money deal, and he would go to WCW. And so there was talks that, and I don't know contractually if there was even a distinct possibility of him even potentially being the third man. I don't know. I've not really looked into that. But hypothetically, let's say it happened. It obviously, I think, would have been a big shock still, because at that time you could still surprise, guys, people still got surprised when people showed up on the other television show. We didn't have the online, world that we have now where we could find things out instantaneously. However, I don't know. It would have been a big deal. I don't think it would have had the impact as Hogan coming out and turning would be. And it certainly would not have offered this renaissance of renewal of Hulk Hogan's career, because when he turned heel and did the Hollywood Hogan thing, that gave him second life. I mean, because he was stale. People were really over the Hulkamania thing. And this gave him a second lease on life in his career. So I don't think it would have had the same impact that Hogan's turn did. It still would have been a big deal. It still would have been, kind of cool. But I still think at this time, Shawn Michaels would have been extraordinarily difficult to work with. And ultimately, it probably would have just been a pain in the ass for WCW to have Shawn in that position, especially with his buddies. And some of the same things that happened in WCW in the end, I probably would have even been sped up, and they probably would have got to that demise even a little earlier.
Absolutely. I would agree with that too. One thing I would add though is that I would say that maybe if Shawn Michaels would have moved over, we would have never have gotten a Blue World Order, which would have been a service to us all.
Perhaps. Yeah. But you also think, I mean, if he, what would that have meant for Bret? If Shawn had gone, Bret probably would have never left. Bret would have been okay. Bret would have been, there wouldn't have been maybe this rift, this battle of power with Shawn and Bret, and some of this behind the scenes and type of thing. So it would have changed that whole course. Bret probably would have continued to be the face of WWE for even longer, I would think. So there would have been a lot of trickle down effect in that. But ultimately, the ultimate point, the Bash at the Beach third man unveil, I don't think Shawn. Well, it would have been big. I don't think it would have the same impact as what Hogan did. So.
No, absolutely. It looks like the next one we got here, and this one's a good one too. All of these are good ones, but this next one is: what if the WWF went forward with nationwide expansion with Carrie Von Erich instead of Hulk Hogan?
This what this spawns from Vince McMahon, by all accounts, had a hard on for Carrie Von Erich in the early '80s. Of course, Carrie had. He had the look, he had the charisma. Well, he was not this extravagant in-ring performer. He was good. He was solid. He severely lacked on the mic. He was hard. Sometimes his interviews were a little incoherent, but that could have been the drug use. But,
right.
But there was this point when Vince was starting to expand, and he did this thing where he had this nationwide show in USA, and he was kind of reaching out to other promoters to get footage and get matches and stuff, and he's like, I'll put you on this nationwide show, blah, blah, blah. Essentially what he was doing is all these guys that he was using the footage of and he's putting on the show were the guys that he was targeting to poach from these territories that he wanted on his roster. So essentially what he was doing, he was really pre-setting up what his talent roster was going to be and starting to nationally promote these guys. One of the guys he showed a lot on this show was Carrie Von Erich in Texas. He really wanted Carrie. He really thought Carrie could have been rightfully so, I think, could have been a huge star. I don't know. The logistics of it are difficult, though, because at that time, World Class was still very, very popular, which was run by Fritz, his father, it had his brothers there. And so I don't know if logistically Carrie would have done it, if he would have abandoned Fritz and done this. I don't think they were at that point, because ultimately when Carrie went to the WWF, World Class was done. It was really done, and Fritz kind of told him, yeah, I'll go make some money. Go do this. You need to go do this. So I don't know the likelihood. Now, if it had somehow worked out, and if it had somehow had happened, I don't see Carrie Von Erich being able to carry this expansion on his back like Hulk Hogan did. I don't think there was necessarily anybody who could have carried it on their back like Hulk Hogan did. You hear talks of who could it have been if it wasn't Hulk. If Hulk had stayed in the AWA, who could it have been? Could it have been Austin Idol? There was these talks of Austin Idol because he was a big bodybuilder guy who had the bleached blonde hair and he could talk. But Austin Idol didn't like to stick around anywhere very long. I don't think there's anybody that had all the necessary tools to carry this like Hulk Hogan did. They might have had the same looks. They might have had the body. They might have had all these things. But Hogan, he had it all. He had the looks. He had, the physique. He had the charisma that had reached out to kids and everything. And he had this. He was the company guy, right? He was willing to go out there and do all these things and make all these public appearances. Carrie Von Erich couldn't have done that. He could not have done all these appearances. He could not have carried this workload. He had substance abuse problems that would have just been compounded by this strenuous schedule and travel schedule. I just don't think it would happen. I think Carrie would have been a mess. I think Carrie probably would have overdosed. I think it would have been a mess. I don't think Carrie had the tools to carry. I don't think there was anybody else that could have necessarily done it the way Hogan did it. It was just the right person at the right place at the right time. And other guys could have had some success, but not to the level that Hogan did. So I don't know if it would have. They still probably think would have nationwide expanded, but I don't think it wouldn't have been the same as what Hogan did in the crossover appeal and everything else that Hulk Hogan had. And I don't mean that with any disrespect to Carrie Von Erich. I just think that at that time, Hulk Hogan, it was just the unique timing and unique talent to carry it at that time.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Let's see. Next one is, what if Roddy Piper went to Crockett Promotions after leaving WWF in 1987?
Let's see. This would have been like around WrestleMania 3 when he left after when he beat Adrian Adonis and disappeared for a while and went to Hollywood. And there were talks that when he was ready to come back, that he was going to go to the NWA. I don't think it would have made a difference in any capacity. Honest to God, he could have had a decent little run in the NWA at that time, to 87, 88. Probably could have done a thing with Flair and some other guys, and it would have been great. It would have been good, but in the grand scheme, it wouldn't have changed anything. I mean, Piper, he came back to WWF later, and he was a big player and won the Intercontinental title, but he was not main eventing at that time. He had done his thing. For like we had talked just before about the expansion on Hogan's back. To be fair, that every good hero needs a great villain. And when that was built in the the early 80s, the mid 80s with WrestleMania at 85, Roddy Piper was that villain. I don't know if Hulkamania does what it does and reaches the level it does without Roddy Piper as the villain, because you can like somebody to a certain level, but you like them even more when there's somebody across the ring that you hate so much. It just compounds that. So, but that had already happened. I mean, McMahon had already drained Piper for what he needed at this time. Piper was very popular, very big, but he was not a main event guy. So I don't think it would have been good for the NWA. It would have given them a little burst for a while. It would have been interesting to see, because in the 88 time, the 88 into 89, that's when Ricky Steamboat came over, had the feud with Flair. It would have been interesting if Piper had been there just prior to that, what that would have meant for that. If that would have still happened that way, if Piper had kind of slid in and done something with Flair, it would have been good stuff. There would have been some good matches, there would have been some good work, but ultimately, in the grand scheme and history of professional wrestling, I don't think it would have made it easy.
But no, I would also agree with that too. I feel like, especially the way you put it, was very well put. Let's see. Well, next one. You're like, of course it was. This is my show. The next one is, what if Magnum Ta hadn't wrecked his car?
Magnum Ta would have been the NWA World Champion shortly after. He was being groomed. He was going to be that guy. He was the Dusty Rhodes guy. I mean, everybody knows this, that follows the NWA. Dusty Rhodes loved him. He was hugely over with the fans. He had the charisma. He had the work rate. He was being groomed. He was going to be an NWA World Champion. I don't think Magnum Ta was going to be this monumental star long term. He was a Southern wrestling star that worked in the NWA. I do think at some point he would have ended up in the WWF, because at that time almost everybody at some point ended up in the WWF. I don't think he would have been a huge impact in the WWF. He'd have been a nice upper mid-card guy, but because that's just the way Vince ran it.
All right, next question. Next question is, what if Eric Bischoff had gotten the financial backing and kept WCW away from Vince McMahon?
So this is a curious, because the rumor is, I don't think it's a rumor. I mean, it's been put out there. Eric Bischoff had financial backers. He was all set to buy WCW. And financial backers, and the deal was virtually in place because Bischoff had told them he had TV backing. I don't think he had the TV backing. I think it fell through or whatever else. So they just did this. They went with the guaranteed money real quick, sold out to Vince. Had it been in place, say Eric had a TV, some kind of TV deal, had it bought it. Here's what would happen. In my opinion, WCW would have lasted a few more years, and it still would have ended up disappearing and going bankrupt. Eric Bischoff bled money. He spent so much money to bring in all these guys that would hotshot it for a while and give them a spike, and ultimately long term it did work. They weren't. I don't think Eric Bischoff was the guy to run anything long term. If he would have done it and went in with the mindset to run it with the right budget and to not get too overzealous with what he's spending and to keep a nice balance, and if he'd got a decent TV deal, he could have ran a nice promotion and they could have be still running today. I don't think they would have ever been another viable contender or competitor for WWE. They would have been the strong number 2 because I just think that's the way the business is destined to be. They can strike for a while, but ultimately everybody else is just second fiddle to WWE. It's become such a known brand. But it all depends on Eric Bischoff's mindset. If he had continued on with or had returned to what he had done in WCW before, where he spent a lot of money on guys that came in and ran their own thing, and they were doing their own stuff, and there was not a set leader and whatever else, WCW just would have lasted a couple more years, and he would have still ended up selling it out to Vince, selling the tape library. If Bischoff had put the right people in place, had been a little more frugal, and had a little better control of the promotion, like I said, I think they could still be a strong number 2 to this day. So, but I don't know if Eric Bischoff has the capability of changing his approach to the wrestling business. I think he has this spend money, hotshot approach, and that doesn't work long term for something like this. So,
right. All right. So the next one. This is also another Von Erich question. What if David Von Erich had lived?
See, everybody seems to think that David Von Erich would have been the NWA World Champion at some point. I seem to think I tend to agree with that. They had sent David Von Erich to Florida for a while, and they had ran him as a heel, and it was very successful. He did some very good stuff in a short time down there in Florida. That is one of the true testaments and trademarks to a guy that they're getting ready to make NWA World Champion at that time. That person has to be able to work a babyface and work heel because it depends on what territory you're in. That person has to be willing to travel. And I think David Von Erich would have been a good short-term NWA champion. I'm not 100% sold that they would have given it to him, but he would have been a major star. Now, what is most curious about this, in my eyes, is David Von Erich was at the age that he would have still been around and been fairly competitive come time for the Attitude Era. He would not have been too old. He would have just probably been in his 40s, I believe, if I'm remembering right. So it would have been so wild to see what David Von Erich would have been doing at that time. He would have been around with the Hogans and the Flairs and some of those at that time. He would have been right there at that age and with those guys. So it would have been crazy to me to think that David, a Von Erich of any sorts, would have been around at that time and could have played a major role in the Attitude Era. I still think, I don't know, I think he would have, for either WWE or WCW at that time, I think he would have had a major role. And it would have been pretty cool to see what he would have done and what they could have done with him at that time when things had changed so much, and to see if he would have still been there and been a major player, or if, he would just have, kind of disappeared in a way. I don't know. That's the wild thing to me is that age where he would have fallen and what was to come with wrestling. So, but Ike, before we continue on here, let's take a break real quick and pay the bills and hear from the sponsors. We'll be right back with more of our second half of our what if scenarios. So stick around. Hey, make sure you visit DaveDynasty.com. That is your central hub for everything within the world of the Dave Dynasty Show. From there, you can find links to follow us on all of our social media accounts. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course YouTube, which you will want to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have lots of classic wrestling every episode of the podcast, and other exclusive features there. While you're at DaveDynasty.com, check out the links to help financially support the show. That is how we keep this free every week. You can go to ProWrestlingTees.com/The Dave Dynasty and buy a shirt to help us out. PayPal.me/The Dave Dynasty to make a one-time financial contribution. Patreon.com/The Dave Dynasty to make ongoing monthly contributions. Or you can click our affiliate links for Amazon.com and HighSpots.com. No additional charge to you, but it helps us out. Thank you for your support, and check out DaveDynasty.com to complete your experience with The Dave Dynasty Show. 2020 has been the year of things happening that are completely out of our control. But there is one thing you can control, and that is shaving your bush. That's right. Our sponsors at Manscaped are here to remind you to do so. Now, we've all experienced the quarantine, and when you don't go out in public a lot or you don't go to work as much, you tend to forget the personal grooming habits that you're used to. Well, the Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0 is a premium electric trimmer that's designed to give you a confidence boost through body image. It's very important to groom even during this time. Their ceramic blade and skin-safe technology are designed to reduce nicks or tugs on you fellas down low. The Lawnmower 3.0 is also waterproof and comes with an LED light, so you can manscape in the shower, in the dark, or in a dark shower, whatever floats your boat. They also just released their Shears 2.0 nail kit, which is the perfect add-on to their Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer. The Shears 2.0 is a luxury 4-piece nail kit featuring tempered stainless steel tools, and it includes tipped tweezers, rounded point scissors, fingernail clippers, and a medium grit nail file. The Shears 2.0 nail kit allows you to pluck your eyebrows and trim your nails in style. On their website, you'll also find the Crop Preserver, an anti-chafing ball deodorant and moisturizer. This will help you tame that summer swamp ass with natural hydrators and antioxidants. You'll also find the Crop Reviver, a testy toner that's like having cologne that is designed for your balls. We won't judge you if we catch you sniffing yourself. Go to Manscaped.com and check out some of these life-changing products. In fact, listeners of the Dave Dynasty Show will get 20% off plus free shipping with the code DYNASTY20 at Manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at Manscaped.com and use code DYNASTY20. It's time to grab 2020 by the horns by shaving that front trunk. All right, now welcome back to the Dave Dynasty Show here. We're running through some of the listener-submitted what-if scenarios. And we've run about halfway through our list, so to speak. So we've had a Von Erich heavy question. So hopefully maybe the second half we'll have some non-Von Erich stuff. So, okay, Ike, go ahead, shoot me another one.
All right, next question. What if Dave or Mike Von Erich? No, I'm kidding.
My.
I was trying to remember another Von Erich. But no, this one is, what if Bill Goldberg wouldn't have kicked Bret Hart's head off?
Oh, well, Bill Goldberg would not be one of the most hated, my most hated wrestlers ever, because for all intents and purposes, he did. He ended Bret Hart's career. But again, if times had been different in this day and age, Bret Hart, would have been with concussion protocol, would have been taken off the road for a couple months or whatever and been fine. At that time, they didn't know, and Bret Hart continued to work, and it didn't work out. So if Bill Goldberg had known how to work and had pulled the kick like he was supposed to and hadn't have given Bret Hart this horrible concussion, Bret Hart ultimately, he would have kept wrestling and ultimately would have wound up back in WWE a lot sooner. He was unhappy in WCW. He thought it was a joke the way it was ran. At some point, he would have seen the light and he would have come back to WCW. And again, it would have been pretty cool because in his final years, what would have been his final years in ring, I could have seen him back in that post-Attitude Era WWE competing with some of those guys, the Benoits and the Malenkos and the Guerreros and those guys, and having some of those late career matches with those. That would have been pretty cool to see. And obviously, I know he's wrestled some of these guys at different times, but to see him on that stage at that time, in the last bits of his career would have been neat. So I think Bret's career would have went on a little longer. I think he would have achieved a little more in his legacy, which is already pretty damn good. And maybe I wouldn't hate Bill Goldberg. There's a whole other layer of Bill Goldberg hate I have, besides the fact that I think he's horrible and can't work. He's the guy that ended Bret Hart's career, so I'll forever hold a grudge on that. So go ahead, let's move on. This is too depressing.
Well, here's another depressing question. What if Bruiser Brody wasn't murdered?
Oh my gosh. This is probably the biggest what if that is ever brought up with people. The most discussed what if, I think, probably in the history of professional wrestling is what if Brody hadn't been murdered. I think, in my opinion, what would have happened is eventually Bruiser Brody would have had a big money run in WWE. Bruiser Brody was all about the business. He was all about the money. I don't think he would have been a long-term stay in the WWE, but there would have been a run where he would have come in as the crazy-ass heel. He would have had a big main event feud with Hulk Hogan and made lots and lots of money, and then he would have just scurried off, done his thing in Japan, and been a happy rich man. I think that was destined to happen. I think there was already interest there in it happening. There was always the rumor that Brody was desired to be the guy to wrestle Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 2 and not King Kong Bundy, and it never happened. So I think ultimately that's what would happen. I think he'd have won him in WWE. He would have made a lot of money. He'd have had a good run with Hogan as the big crazy monster at that time for Hogan to wrestle. And then I think he would have moved on, did his thing in Japan and whatever else, and just been rich. But he was all about the money, all about the business. And at some point in time, I think Brody and Vince would have done business.
Of course. If you're a big name wrestler, I think at some point you'll do business with Vince.
Yeah.
But this one's actually a good one. I actually have never heard this, so you may need to give me a little backstory here. But what if the Iron Sheik took Vern Gagne's offer and broke Hulk Hogan's leg?
Okay. So this is a legit thing. When the Iron Sheik was trained in the AWA. He's trained by Vern Gagne and started in the AWA when he first broke into the professional. So he had this connection to Vern Gagne. In 84, when he was the champ, he was a transitional champ to get the belt to Hogan. He was having the match where he was going to drop it to Hogan. There was this thing. It has all been confirmed, pretty much confirmed, by so many people that Vern Gagne reached out to the Iron Sheik and offered him, I don't even remember what it was now, $100,000. I don't know, not that much. I don't know what it was. Offered him some sum of money. I don't remember the amount. To not drop the belt, to shoot on Hulk Hogan and break his leg because Vern was shitty about Vince and his expansion. Iron Sheik said, nope. He went straight to Vince McMahon and said, hey, this is what happened. He called me and said this. I just want you to know I'm not going to do this. We're doing business. I'm good. This is why Iron Sheik had a very, very long run with Vince. This is why Iron Sheik gets brought back a lot by Vince to do appearances and get some paydays, because Vince likes guys that are loyal to him for the most part and will do things. So that put him in the good graces, which ultimately was great for Sheik because obviously Vince took control of the business. But if he had taken it, if he had broke Hogan's leg and shot on him and walked out of that ring with the belt, because that's all they could have done. They, to the crowd, they would have thought he was still champ. As soon as he would have crossed that curtain and stepped in the back, he would have got jumped by several guys. Vince would have taken that belt from him and said, get your ass out of here. We no longer need your services. And they would have done something to proclaim a new champion or what have you. But it's funny with the Iron Sheik, with all his quirks and his drug use and everything else over the years. He does have a lot of integrity, though, and he did not do that. He stayed true to what he was, and Vince always rewarded him very well for that. He had a long run, a lot of big matches, tag title runs after dropping the belt, merchandise very well to make lots of money. Still, and many years later, it gets brought back. Got brought back to try to do a manager role and has made WrestleMania appearances. And a lot of this stems from the fact that Sheik was loyal to Vince in this time and didn't take Gagne's money and shoot on Hogan that day.
Absolutely. I've actually never heard that story, but that's freaking wild, dude.
That was wrestling back then. That was wrestling. That was these old school shooters. They did shit like this all the time. It was so crazy. It was wild. It's part of the stuff I love about the history of wrestling. It's some of this, the crazy stuff that happened.
Jeez. All right. So here's another good one. This is what if Ricky Morton had split with Robert Gibson and taken the belt from Flair as offered?
Well, see, again, this is one of those things. There's discrepancies because there's always been this talk, according to Ricky Morton, that he was offered to be NWA champion, that Flair wanted to drop the belt to him. It was going to be a short run though, and Ricky did not do it because he did not want to split up the Rock and Roll Express. He did not want to leave Robert Gibson behind and become a star. He didn't want to do any of that. There were a lot of guys that said, I don't think this was true. I don't think this really happened. That I don't think there was ever this concrete, we're going to make you champion. I think Ricky Morton's even said to the point that there was a match where he actually pinned Flair, walked to the back with the belt, and then gave it to him, said, I'm not doing this. Here's the belt. But I don't know. Again, I don't know which side to believe per se. If Ricky had done it, and if this is true, and if he had become champion, it would have been a short run. He would have held the belt long. It would have ended up going back to Flair. I think in the long history, Ricky Morton, it would have hurt him more than it helped him, because ultimately he probably would have got back with Robert Gibson. But I think if they had tried to make him more of a singles guy and been serious about a singles run with him for a while at this time around 87 or so, I think when this supposedly happened, I think it would have hurt the longevity of the Rock and Roll Express clearly. And I don't know if now here in 2020 there would still be Rock and Roll Express appearances and they'd be in there whatever, however many decades they've done this now. And ultimately I think it would have tarnished their image because overall. Yeah, Ricky Morton could have said he was a former NWA champion. Yeah, he would have made a lot of money that night and maybe on a few other shows. He made plenty of money anyway. So I think he made if this is true, and it did not go with the title change and said he wasn't going to leave Robert behind. I think he made the right choice ultimately, because I think Ricky Morton's, he wouldn't have been in the WWE Hall of Fame, I don't think, if he had done that. I don't think there would have been enough there. I think Ricky Morton's place in history is alongside Robert Gibson as the Rock and Roll Express. I think he made the right choice in the path, but I do question whether there is validity to that story. So,
right, as always, there's always a little bit of question as to whether this is a couple people shooting the shit and saying, "Oh yeah, I used to be." All right, here's a good what if. All right, what if superstar Billy Graham remained WWF champion instead of Bob Backlund?
Well, things would have been right in the world at that time, because that's exactly what should have happened. Superstar Billy Graham should have turned face and should have remained WWF champion for a long time. There should have been no Bob Backlund run. Superstar Billy Graham should have held the belt most of the way through that, what ended up being the Backlund reign. No offense to Bob Backlund, but Superstar Billy Graham was huge over. He was just major over. He had this charisma. He had the charisma that Hulk Hogan stole to make Hulkamania, and that Jesse the Body Ventura stole to do his thing. Superstar Billy Graham was a heel. He was a heel who ended Bruno Sammartino's second reign, and he was a heel who ultimately was so damn cool in New York that the people started loving him. And the natural progression would have been that he should have turned face. He should have kept the belt. He should have had this huge run. It fucked with Superstar Billy Graham so bad when he had to drop the belt, because he was so over. He was so popular. He was walking down in crowds with volume. This is no lie. This was legit true. And then when he had dropped the belt, it just messed with his head and it messed with his self-worth. And, he disappeared for a while and everything else. So I don't know. There's all these rumors and whatever else of why Bob Backlund ever held the belt. There's rumors that Vince McMahon Sr. did it because he was dared. Oh, you'll never make Bob Backlund a champion. And Vince Sr. was like, oh yeah, watch me. And all this stupid stuff. I don't know. It was wild. Superstar Billy Graham should have turned face. He should have been the WWF champion for a long time, and it would have been great. It would have been spectacular.
Absolutely. I was looking up some stuff about Bob Backlund the other day because I saw an old match of his. It's when he came back to the WWF in like the 90s, just randomly.
That was his best stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say
when he was crazy. Oh, that was the best stuff.
Yep. That's what I was gonna say. That was some really good stuff, and I was like, I've never really seen old Bob Backlund, but I've seen 90s Backlund.
He was boring. He was boring. He was just this collegiate, squeaky clean, howdy doody, good guy. It was boring. It was really. He had great matches. He was a great worker, but it was just boring. He was boring. he was no Billy Graham, but no offense to Bob Backlund, but he was boring.
Bob Backlund ain't no Billy Graham. That's right.
Nope.
All right. I just noticed that both of their names both start. Or never mind. I'm crazy. I thought crazy. I thought they were both B's. I'm like, what? Anyways, what if the first WrestleMania was a failure?
Well, Vince McMahon would have lost his house because he did take a second mortgage on his house to help fund it. And this part of this is what disturbs me, because here recently, Jerry Briscoe was released by WWE after like 30-something years of employment. And that's what pisses me off so much, because I know a lot of people think, oh, it's 30 years, he's in his 70s or whatever, he had a good career, that's okay. No, Vince McMahon should pay Jerry Briscoe for the rest of his life, because Jerry Briscoe was so instrumental in the first WrestleMania happen, because what happened is Vince McMahon went and bought the Georgia Championship Wrestling time slot for WTBS. He bought out shares of Georgia Championship Wrestling for that time slot. And the reason he got to do that was because Jerry Briscoe sold out his shares to Vince at that time. And that enabled him to go on TBS. There was this huge backlash. They didn't want WWF on TBS. The fans didn't. But ultimately what happened is Vince then sold that time slot to Jim Crockett for $1 million. And that's what helped fund the first WrestleMania. So if it had not been for Jerry Briscoe selling his shares and giving Vince that, I don't know if WrestleMania 1 would happen. I don't think it would have. It wouldn't have had the funding. But anyway, that's off the side. If the first WrestleMania had been a failure, it would have changed the course of wrestling, because the WWF would not have been as huge, at least as quick, because it would have ruined financially Vince McMahon, because he mortgaged his house to help fund it. He was putting all his chips in on this one. If it hadn't been successful, if it had failed, if it had bombed, the WWE would have either went back to being very regional, or it would have started to disappear, and Titan Sports would have had to, declare bankruptcy or something. It would have financially crippled him. Now, I don't know whether he couldn't have somehow fought his way back in a different avenue, but it would have definitely been different. It just would have been different. It would have changed and altered the timeline so much. And I don't know if WWE, we may not be sitting here today with WWE as being the premier leader in the industry, or we might, but just maybe not on the same level. But it definitely would have impacted and changed the trajectory of the WWE after that.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with that. All right. So, okay, this one says, what if the NWA went with Ted DiBiase over Ric Flair and 81 as NWA champ as rumored?
Oh, man. It would... here's the thing. Ted DiBiase would have made a good NWA champ at the time. He was good. Ted DiBiase was one of the best workers in the ring. He had a personality. He could work face and heel. But he was not Ric Flair. And while he could work probably better than Flair in the ring at that time, especially, Ric Flair had this bigger than life personality. Now, I still think ultimately Flair would have been the guy they went with. I don't know if I don't think it really would have made that big a difference in 81, because DiBiase would have held the belt. I don't think he would have held it for a long time. He would have dropped it to Dusty or back to Harley Race, and I think we still would have wound up, with Flair, being the ultimate guy in NWA. Because, you have to keep in mind, while Flair won his first title in 81, it wasn't, he didn't hold it from there on out. He dropped it again, and when Flair really launched was in 83 at Starrcade, when he won the belt from Harley Race the second time. And so I think we would have still ended up at that spot. I think Ted DiBiase would have gotten a run as NWA champ. I think he would have been pretty good. I think it would have worked well, but I think all it would have mattered is he would have just had that Flair run of 81. I don't think ultimately it would have ended up making a difference long term. I think everything would have still been the same, and Ric Flair would have just had one less title reign under his belt.
I was like, it's not like he has any to spare, right? No, I'm kidding.
No, really.
But so this one's a good one too, and I've never heard of this one either, so I may need a little context here. But what if Tully Blanchard hadn't been popped with a drug test right before he and Arn Anderson left the WWF?
Oh, see, this is one of my favorite what ifs. So there was the time, okay, with Tully and Arn go to the WWF, they do the brainbuster thing with Bobby Heenan, they win the tag titles. It's a great run. I very much enjoyed it. Ultimately, though, their contracts are up, and they're going back to the NWA. They're going back to Crockett. This is the time, though, with Jim Herd's in charge. There was the whole plan that they were going to go back. They were reforming the Horsemen with Ric Flair. It was going to be this big thing. It would have been pretty cool. The word is that they had big buddy contracts with Tully and Arn on the table. The word is what happened is right before the contracts went and Tully and Arn left WWF, that Tully had been busted for cocaine and failed a drug test. Somehow, Jim Herd hears about a drug test that Tully Blanchard fails in WWF and says, "Nope, we're not signing him now. We don't want Tully anymore. We'll sign you, Arn, but not Tully." So Arn has to take the deal, but what it meant was Arn was not as valuable at that time without Tully because they were a tag team, so he had to take a lot less money to come in. The big Horseman reunion, they did reunite the Horsemen, but it wasn't the same. It didn't have 3 of the 4 original guys there. And Tully disappeared for a while and wrestled some independents and then ended up going into, preaching and whatever else. But if it's crazy to me, the whole deal is crazy. If that's the way it happened, I don't know how Jim Herd pulls a contract off of a guy for failing a drug test for another company. I mean, to me, if there's this rumor, it's like, okay, you can have the contract, but retest him. To me, that's what makes sense. You'd say, okay, but you're going to have to do a pre-employment drug screen. I don't know. It's weird. But if he had gone back to WCW, it would have been so great because the Horsemen would have got back together. They would have had more of an impact. But ultimately, Jim Herd would have fucked it up because Jim Herd fucked up everything. He created the ding dongs. He did all these stupid ass things. It's hard telling what he would have done. He did not like Ric Flair. It ultimately, there's no way Jim Herd and Tully Blanchard would have coexisted. They would have been fighting. They would have been arguing. Tully would have ended up quitting and walking out. It would have been a mess backstage, and what it would have been product wise wouldn't have lasted very long because again, Jim Herd fucked up everything, and there's no way that Jim Herd and Tully Blanchard would have coexisted. I just cannot imagine that at all. So it would have been neat to have seen it in the initial in that moment where they walk out and Tully and Arn's back. It would have been very, very cool. But long term, it would have been a mess, and it wouldn't have lasted very long. So, yep.
Sure. Actually, I think that was the last one.
That's it. Well, that's a good one to end on. So, because I'm a big Tully Blanchard fan. I'm a big fan of his. He is part of the bright spots of AEW now with him managing FTR. That's one of the few things that will actually seek out the clips to watch. So that's a good one to end on. So, all right. But like we said, we've got a whole slew of other what ifs. So we're going to do this again in the future. I would put out there was going to have someone else join us, have a 3-man kind of team on this. And we were just scheduling wise. It didn't work out. We had someone in line. They had a shift in their schedule. So we just decided to go ahead and plug ahead and just listen to me ramble about it. And that's okay because I guess my name's on the marquee. I guess some of you like to hear me ramble a little, so whatever. But anyway, you can continue on this discussion. You can continue to send us what-if scenarios. Maybe we'll use them in the future. And we'd love to hear your feedback. What do you guys think of some of these scenarios we went over today? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Tell me what you think. Let's hear it. I like to talk wrestling. I like to hear people's opinions. So whenever we post this out there on social media, let us hear your side of it. So that's going to do it for this week. Again, follow me on Twitter. I am at the Dave Dynasty Ike. How can they follow you on Twitter?
You can follow me at Pint-Sized Beast.
There you go. So look him up. Make sure you subscribe to us wherever you listen to this podcast. Leave us a rating review. Make sure you share the episodes. If you want to make a financial contribution, go to paypal.me/TheDaveDynasty to make a one-time contribution, or you go to patreon.com/TheDaveDynasty to make ongoing monthly contributions. We do appreciate that. It helps keep the show going. Make sure you support our sponsor, Manscaped, because everybody needs to groom down in the area. So they got some good stuff. So make sure you check them out. Use our promo code, get a discount and free shipping. That's it for this week. I'm done with the what if scenarios because a lot of this makes me depressed to think of what could have been on some of these scenarios. It would have been great. So, all right. So Ike, that's it for this week. Thanks for coming on again and helping me out. And we will see you next week with another episode of the Dave Dynasty Show. And wherever you go and whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.